Was Saddam Hussein a hero or a villain? Looking into history, one cannot escape the enigma of Saddam Hussein. Revered by some as a staunch defender of his nation's sovereignty and vilified by others as a ruthless dictator, Hussein's legacy is related to stories of both heroism and villainy. From his rise to prominence in the 1970s to his eventual downfall in the early 2000s, Hussein's reign was marked by internal repression and external aggression. Yet, amidst the chaos and controversy, there are moments of ambiguity that challenge our perceptions and force us to question the very essence of heroism and villainy. Was Hussein a visionary leader who sought to uplift his people, a tyrant who trampled upon their rights? Let's find out. In the pantheon of controversial figures, few are as polarizing as Saddam Hussein. Widely condemned as a dictator responsible for significant human rights abuses, his name evokes images of repression. However, beyond the mainstream portrayal lies a leader whose contributions to Iraq's development and regional stability are often overlooked. This video will provide a balanced perspective, highlighting the positive aspects of Hussein's leadership while acknowledging the darker facets of his rule. Throughout his reign, Hussein embarked on ambitious modernization projects that transformed Iraq's infrastructure, economy, and social services. His efforts to nationalize the oil industry and implement economic reforms propelled Iraq into an era of unprecedented growth. Despite his authoritarian methods, these initiatives improved the standard of living for many Iraqis and positioned the country as a key player in the Middle East. In addition to his domestic policies, Hussein's geopolitical strategies played a crucial role in maintaining regional stability and countering foreign intervention. By examining these often underappreciated aspects of his leadership, this video will provide a nuanced understanding of Saddam Hussein, offering a perspective that goes beyond the conventional narrative. So let's start with Iraq. Before Saddam Hussein rose to power, Iraq was a nation marked by political instability, economic challenges, and the legacies of colonialism. The modern state of Iraq was established under British mandate after World War I, following the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire. The Mandate period was characterized by resistance to British rule and a struggle for independence, which Iraq finally achieved in 1932. However, the newly independent nation grappled with internal divisions, tribal conflicts, and the economic legacies of colonial exploitation. The monarchy established after independence faced numerous challenges, including managing ethnic and sectarian tensions among the Sunni, Shia, and Kurdish populations. The Hashemite monarchy's reliance on British support, coupled with its inability to address economic disparities and political demands, led to widespread dissatisfaction. This culminated in the 1958 revolution, which overthrew the monarchy and established a republic. However, the subsequent years were marked by political turbulence, with a series of coups and counter-coups, as various factions vied for power. By the time Saddam Hussein entered the political scene, Iraq was a nation in desperate need of stability and cohesive leadership. The Ba'ath Party, with its ideology of Arab nationalism and socialism, presented itself as a solution to Iraq's fragmentation and economic woes. Hussein, as a key figure within the Ba'ath Party, played a significant role in its rise to power. And how did he rise to power? Saddam Hussein's ascent to power is a story of political action, ambition, and strategic alliances. Born in 1937 in the town of Al-Auja near Tikrit, Hussein's early life was marked by hardship and political awareness. He joined the Ba'ath Party in 1957, drawn to its vision of Arab unity and its commitment to social and economic reforms. The Ba'ath Party first came to power in a 1963 coup, but was quickly ousted. It wasn't until 1968, through a bloodless coup led by Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr that the Ba'ath Party established a more enduring regime. Hussein, as al-Bakr's deputy, played a crucial role in consolidating the party's power. He was instrumental in purging political opponents and strengthening the party's control over the military and security apparatus. By the late 1970s, Saddam Hussein had become the de facto leader of Iraq. In 1979, he formally assumed the presidency after al-Bakr stepped down. Hussein's rise to power was marked by his ability to navigate the complex and often brutal world of Iraqi politics. He used a combination of strategic alliances, political purges, and an extensive security network to eliminate rivals and consolidate his authority. Hussein's early years in power were characterized by efforts to solidify his control and implement ambitious modernization projects. He recognized that maintaining power required not only political repression but also addressing the economic and social needs of the Iraqi population. Thus began a series of initiatives aimed at transforming Iraq into a modern, prosperous nation. And how were his initial years of rule? Hussein's initial years in power saw significant efforts to modernize Iraq's infrastructure and economy. Recognizing the potential of Iraq's vast oil reserves, he moved to nationalize the oil industry in 1972. This bold move wrested control from foreign companies and significantly increased national revenues. The influx of oil wealth provided the financial resources needed to fund extensive public works projects, healthcare improvements, and educational reforms. During the 1970s, Iraq experienced substantial economic growth. Hussein's government invested heavily in building roads, bridges, and urban infrastructure. The capital city, Baghdad, underwent significant modernization, with new buildings, public facilities, and transportation networks transforming the urban landscape. These projects not only improved the quality of life for many Iraqis, but also helped to boost national pride and cohesion. Hussein also focused on diversifying Iraq's economy to reduce dependence on oil. He promoted industrialization and agricultural development, aiming to create jobs and enhance economic resilience. Efforts were made to develop Iraq's manufacturing sector, with investments in industries such as petrochemicals, textiles, and construction materials. In agriculture, initiatives were launched to increase productivity and expand irrigated land, aiming to achieve greater food security. In addition to economic modernization, Hussein implemented significant social and educational reforms. One of his early priorities was to improve the healthcare system. Under his leadership, numerous hospitals and clinics were built across the country, and efforts were made to increase access to medical services. Public health campaigns were launched to combat diseases and improve overall health standards. By the late 1970s, Iraq's healthcare system was considered one of the best in the region. Education was another area where Hussein's impact was notable. His government invested heavily in literacy programs and the establishment of higher education institutions. Primary and secondary education became more accessible, and significant strides were made in increasing literacy rates. Universities and research institutions received substantial funding, fostering an environment of intellectual and scientific growth. These efforts not only elevated the educational standards in Iraq, but also contributed to the country's long-term development. Hussein's leadership was also marked by his geopolitical ambitions. He sought to position Iraq as a leading power in the Arab world and to counteract the influence of both Western powers and regional rivals. His approach to foreign policy was characterized by a mix of diplomacy, military strength, and strategic alliances. One of Hussein's key strategies was to maintain a balance of power in the Middle East. He aimed to navigate the complex relationships between neighboring countries, including Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Syria, as well as major powers like the United States and the Soviet Union. Hussein's ability to play these powers against each other allowed Iraq to maintain a degree of autonomy and influence. However, Hussein's geopolitical strategies were not without controversy. His decision to go to war with Iran in 1980, leading to the protracted and devastating Iran-Iraq War, had significant consequences for Iraq and the region. While the war was initially seen as a means to assert Iraq's dominance and curb Iranian influence, it resulted in massive casualties and economic strain. Throughout his rise and early rule, Hussein's consolidation of power involved a mix of strategic governance and ruthless repression. He built an extensive security apparatus that included multiple intelligence agencies and paramilitary forces. This network allowed him to monitor and suppress any potential dissent effectively. Hussein's rule was also marked by his ability to foster loyalty among key constituencies, including the military, tribal leaders, and the Ba'ath Party elite. He used a combination of patronage, coercion, and propaganda to maintain their support. By cultivating a personality cult, Hussein positioned himself as the indispensable leader of Iraq, central to its identity and destiny. Now let's talk about his effort to modernize the nation and bring economic development. What did he do for that? One of Saddam Hussein's most significant contributions to Iraq was the transformation and modernization of the country's infrastructure. Upon assuming power, Hussein recognized that developing a robust infrastructure was critical for Iraq's long-term economic and social development. His regime invested heavily in large-scale public works projects aimed at improving transportation, urban development, and public utilities. The development of an extensive road network was a key aspect of Hussein's infrastructure strategy. New highways and bridges connected remote areas with major urban centers, facilitating trade and movement. This not only boosted the economy by enhancing market accessibility, but also integrated various regions of Iraq, fostering a sense of national unity. Urban development under Hussein's rule saw the expansion and modernization of major cities, particularly Baghdad. The capital city experienced a construction boom with new government buildings, cultural institutions, and residential areas. Landmark projects, such as the Al-Mansur district and the extensive reconstruction of Baghdad University, symbolized Iraq's modernization drive. These initiatives improved living conditions for many Iraqis and contributed to a burgeoning middle class. Another crucial area of infrastructure development was the expansion of public utilities. Hussein's government undertook significant projects to improve water supply and sewage systems, especially in urban areas. The construction of large dams and irrigation systems aimed to boost agricultural productivity by providing reliable water sources. These efforts were essential in transforming Iraq's largely agrarian economy into a more diversified one. The nationalization of Iraq's oil industry in the early 1970s was one of Saddam Hussein's most defining economic policies. Before nationalization, Iraq's oil resources were primarily controlled by foreign companies, which extracted significant profits while providing relatively little benefit to the Iraqi economy. Hussein's move to nationalize the industry in 1972 was both a bold assertion of sovereignty and a strategic economic decision. By bringing the oil industry under state control, Hussein ensured that the profits from Iraq's vast oil reserves directly benefited the national economy. The revenues generated from oil exports provided the financial foundation for many of Hussein's ambitious modernization projects. This influx of capital enabled large-scale investments in infrastructure, healthcare, education, and social services. The nationalization also allowed Iraq to control its oil production and pricing policies, giving the country greater leverage in the global oil market. As a member of OPEC, Iraq played a significant role in shaping global oil policies, which had far-reaching implications for the international economy. Hussein's ability to navigate these complex dynamics was a testament to his geopolitical acumen. Beyond the nationalization of the oil industry, Saddam Hussein implemented a series of economic reforms aimed at diversifying Iraq's economy and reducing its dependence on oil. Recognizing the risks of relying too heavily on a single resource, his regime pursued policies to develop other sectors such as manufacturing, agriculture, and services. Industrialization was a key focus of Hussein's economic reforms. The government invested in building factories and industrial complexes, particularly in sectors like petrochemicals, textiles, and construction materials. These investments were designed to create jobs, enhance economic self-sufficiency, and reduce the country's dependence on imports. The establishment of the State Organization for Industrial Design and Construction was part of this broader strategy to foster industrial growth. Agriculture also received significant attention. Despite Iraq's arid climate, Hussein's government launched initiatives to increase agricultural productivity and achieve greater food security. Large-scale irrigation projects, including the construction of dams and canals, aimed to make more land arable. Subsidies and support programs were provided to farmers to encourage the cultivation of a wider variety of crops. These efforts contributed to stabilizing rural economies and reducing urban migration. In addition to sector-specific reforms, Hussein's regime also focused on broader economic policies to stabilize and grow the economy. Efforts were made to modernize the financial sector, improve fiscal management, and attract foreign investment. Special economic zones were established to incentivize investment and development. While these reforms had mixed results, they reflected a strategic attempt to create a more balanced and resilient economy. The revenues from the nationalized oil industry enabled significant investments in social policies and public welfare programs. Hussein's regime prioritized healthcare, education, and social welfare as part of its broader modernization agenda. What social policies did he make that changed everything? One of the most significant achievements of Saddam Hussein's regime was the transformation of Iraq's healthcare system. Before his rise to power, Iraq's healthcare infrastructure was underdeveloped, with limited access to medical services, especially in rural areas. Recognizing the importance of public health for national development, Hussein embarked on an ambitious campaign to modernize and expand healthcare facilities across the country. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Africa's geopolitics, economy, and changing landscape. Let's continue now. Under Hussein's leadership, numerous hospitals, clinics, and specialized medical centers were built. These facilities were equipped with modern medical technology and staffed with trained professionals. The government also invested in the training and education of healthcare workers, establishing medical schools and offering scholarships for advanced studies abroad. This investment in human capital ensured a steady supply of skilled medical professionals to support the growing healthcare infrastructure. Public health campaigns played a crucial role in improving health outcomes. The government launched initiatives to combat common diseases such as malaria, tuberculosis, and cholera. Vaccination programs were expanded, and efforts to improve sanitation and access to clean water were intensified. As a result, Iraq saw significant improvements in life expectancy and reductions in infant mortality rates during the early years of Hussein's rule. Expanding healthcare services also included efforts to make healthcare more accessible to all citizens. The government introduced policies to provide free or heavily subsidized medical care, ensuring that even the poorest Iraqis could receive necessary treatments. This approach not only improved public health but also contributed to social stability by reducing economic inequalities related to healthcare access. Education was another cornerstone of Saddam Hussein's social policies. Understanding that a well-educated population was essential for national progress, Hussein's regime made substantial investments in expanding and improving the education system. These efforts aim to increase literacy rates, provide universal primary and secondary education, and promote higher education and research. Under Hussein's rule, the number of schools in Iraq increased dramatically. New schools were built in both urban and rural areas, and existing facilities were upgraded. The government also implemented compulsory education laws, ensuring that children attended school until at least the primary level. These measures resulted in significant increases in enrollment and attendance rates. Literacy programs were a major focus of Hussein's education reforms. The government launched nationwide campaigns to eradicate illiteracy, targeting both children and adults. These programs included evening classes, community education centers, and mobile teaching units that traveled to remote areas. As a result, literacy rates in Iraq improved markedly, contributing to greater social and economic mobility for many citizens. Higher education also received substantial attention. The government invested in the expansion of universities and technical colleges, creating new institutions and upgrading existing ones. Scholarships and grants were offered to students to pursue advanced studies both domestically and abroad. The emphasis on higher education and research aimed to cultivate a skilled workforce and promote innovation, driving Iraq's economic and technological development. Saddam Hussein's regime also implemented a range of social welfare programs designed to improve the living standards of the Iraqi population. These programs addressed various social and economic well-being aspects, including housing, food security, and social safety nets. Housing was a key area of focus. The government launched large-scale housing projects to provide affordable homes for low- and middle-income families. New residential areas were developed, featuring modern amenities and infrastructure. These projects not only addressed housing shortages, but also contributed to urban development and the growth of new communities. Food security was another critical issue. The government introduced subsidies for basic food items, ensuring that essential goods such as bread, rice, and cooking oil were available at affordable prices. This policy helped to alleviate hunger and malnutrition, particularly among the poorest segments of society. Additionally, the government established public distribution systems to ensure that food supplies were evenly distributed across the country. Social safety nets were also an important component of Hussein's social policies. The government provided financial assistance to vulnerable groups, including orphans, widows, and the elderly. Programs were introduced to support the unemployed and those with disabilities, offering financial aid and vocational training to help them reintegrate into the workforce. These measures aimed to reduce poverty and promote social cohesion. Did this leader do something for women? Saddam Hussein's regime made notable strides in promoting women's rights and gender equality. While traditional gender roles remain prevalent in many parts of Iraqi society, the government implemented policies to enhance women's participation in education, the workforce, and public life. Education for girls was prioritized, with the government ensuring equal access to primary and secondary education. Scholarships and support programs were provided to encourage female students to pursue higher education. As a result, the number of women attending universities and obtaining degrees increased significantly during Hussein's rule. In the workforce, the government promoted policies to increase female employment and participation in various sectors. Legal reforms were introduced to ensure equal pay for equal work and to protect women's rights in the workplace. Women were encouraged to take up positions in public administration, healthcare, education, and other fields, contributing to the country's economic development. Women's representation in public life also saw improvements. The government supported women's participation in political and social organizations, and efforts were made to increase the number of women in leadership positions. These initiatives aim to empower women and promote gender equality, challenging traditional norms and creating opportunities for women to contribute to national development. But how was he so different? Saddam Hussein's leadership was characterized by a keen understanding of the complexities of regional geopolitics. He recognized the need to navigate the intricate web of relationships between neighboring countries and major powers to safeguard Iraq's interests and maintain regional stability. Hussein pursued a strategy of balancing regional powers, leveraging Iraq's strategic position to assert influence and counter external threats. One of Hussein's primary objectives was to establish Iraq as a leading power in the Arab world. He championed Arab nationalism and sought to unite Arab states against external adversaries. Despite ideological differences and historical rivalries, Hussein forged alliances with other Arab leaders, positioning Iraq as a key player in regional affairs. His efforts to promote Arab solidarity were evident in his support for the Palestinian cause and his opposition to Israeli occupation and aggression. At the same time, Hussein recognized the importance of maintaining diplomatic relations with non-Arab neighbors and major powers. He pursued a pragmatic approach to foreign policy, engaging in dialogue and negotiation with countries such as Iran, Turkey, and Russia. Hussein understood the strategic significance of these relationships and sought to cultivate mutually beneficial partnerships while safeguarding Iraq's sovereignty. And how did he manage relations with neighboring countries? Hussein's approach to relations with neighboring countries was shaped by a combination of geopolitical considerations and historical grievances. Iraq's borders were a source of contention, particularly with Iran and Kuwait, leading to periodic conflicts and tensions. The Iran-Iraq War, which lasted from 1980 to 1988, was a defining moment in Hussein's foreign policy. The war erupted amid territorial disputes and ideological differences between the two countries, with Iraq fearing the spread of Iran's Islamic Revolution. Hussein's decision to invade Iran was driven by a desire to assert Iraq's regional dominance and weaken Iran's revolutionary fervor. Despite initial military gains, the war ultimately ended in a stalemate, costing both countries millions of lives and economic resources. Relations with Kuwait were also fraught with tension, culminating in the Gulf War of 1990-1991. Hussein's invasion of Kuwait, motivated by territorial disputes and economic grievances, triggered international condemnation and military intervention led by the United States. The subsequent Gulf War and its aftermath, including the imposition of economic sanctions and the overthrow of Hussein's regime in 2003, had far-reaching consequences for Iraq and the region. Despite these conflicts, Hussein pursued a policy of pragmatism and reconciliation with neighboring countries in the post-war period. He sought to mend relations with Iran and Kuwait, recognizing the importance of regional stability and economic cooperation. Diplomatic overtures and confidence-building measures were undertaken to foster dialogue and reduce tensions, although progress was slow and uneven. But we know the West hates him. And why is that? Where did the story take a turn to make West hate him? One of Hussein's most consistent principles was his opposition to foreign intervention and imperialism in the Middle East. He viewed Western powers, particularly the United States and its allies, as hostile forces seeking to undermine Iraq's sovereignty and control the region's resources. Hussein's resistance to foreign intervention was rooted in a deep sense of nationalism and a desire to protect Iraq's independence. Throughout his rule, Hussein confronted numerous external threats and challenges, including military aggression, economic sanctions, and diplomatic isolation. He adopted a confrontational stance against perceived adversaries, rallying domestic support by portraying himself as a defender of Iraqi sovereignty and Arab dignity. Hussein's opposition to foreign intervention extended beyond rhetoric to practical measures aimed at strengthening Iraq's defenses and deterring potential aggressors. He invested heavily in the military, acquiring advanced weapon systems and building a formidable armed force. Hussein also pursued alliances with other anti-imperialist states and sought to exploit divisions within the international community to advance Iraq's interests. Despite these efforts, Hussein's confrontational approach ultimately isolated Iraq from the international community and contributed to its diplomatic and economic isolation. The imposition of economic sanctions in the aftermath of the Gulf War devastated Iraq's economy and exacerbated social hardships, leading to widespread suffering among the Iraqi population. But what he did can't be erased. Saddam Hussein's geopolitical strategy and leadership had a profound impact on regional stability in the Middle East. While his confrontational approach and aggressive policies contributed to periods of conflict and instability, Hussein also played a crucial role in maintaining a balance of power in the region and resisting external domination. Hussein's legacy continues to shape regional dynamics and perceptions of Iraq's role in the Middle East. His authoritarian rule and human rights abuses remain sources of controversy and condemnation. However, his efforts to promote Arab unity, resist foreign intervention, and assert Iraq's sovereignty are also remembered by many as acts of defiance against imperialism and oppression. In the aftermath of Hussein's regime, Iraq has faced significant challenges in rebuilding its economy, restoring political stability, and reconciling sectarian divisions. The legacy of his leadership continues to be debated, with some viewing him as a hero who defended Iraq against external threats, and others condemning him as a tyrant responsible for untold suffering and destruction. Scholars and analysts offer diverse perspectives on Saddam Hussein's leadership and its impact on regional stability. Some argue that Hussein's authoritarian rule and aggressive policies exacerbated tensions and conflicts in the Middle East, leading to instability and suffering for millions of people. They point to his record of human rights abuses, including the suppression of dissent and the use of chemical weapons against civilian populations, as evidence of his ruthless and oppressive regime. Others take a more nuanced view, acknowledging Hussein's role in resisting foreign intervention and promoting Arab unity. They argue that Hussein's confrontational approach was a response to external threats and aggression, and that his leadership was driven by a desire to protect Iraq's sovereignty and independence. They highlight his efforts to modernize Iraq's economy, invest in social welfare programs, and build a strong military as evidence of his commitment to national development. Ultimately, understanding the complexities of Saddam Hussein's geopolitical strategy and regional impact requires a balanced assessment of his leadership, taking into account both his achievements and his shortcomings. His legacy continues to be a subject of debate and controversy, shaping perceptions of Iraq's role in the Middle East and the broader global order. Here it is important to talk about the actions he took that made his position controversial. This way, taking him as a hero or villain will be up to you. The Ba'ath Party, under Hussein's leadership, established a pervasive surveillance state with multiple intelligence agencies and paramilitary forces monitoring the population for signs of dissent. Political opponents, real or perceived, were systematically targeted and often subjected to arbitrary arrest, torture, and execution. The regime's security apparatus operated with impunity, instilling a climate of fear and mistrust among the Iraqi people. Hussein's authoritarian rule extended to Iraqi society, stifling political pluralism, free speech, and civil liberties. Independent media outlets were shut down, and censorship was widespread, with dissenting voices silenced or co-opted by the regime. Freedom of association and assembly was severely restricted, with political parties, unions, and civil society organizations tightly controlled or banned outright. The regime's brutal repression extended beyond domestic dissent to target ethnic and religious minorities, particularly the Kurds and Shia populations. Hussein's government waged campaigns of persecution and violence against these communities, including the infamous Anfal genocide against the Kurds in the late 1980s and the suppression of Shia uprisings following the Gulf War in 1991. One of the most notorious aspects of Saddam Hussein's rule was his use of chemical weapons against civilian populations, most notably during the Iran-Iraq War and the Anfal campaign against the Kurds. The use of chemical weapons, including mustard gas and nerve agents, resulted in thousands of deaths and widespread suffering, leaving a lasting legacy of physical and psychological trauma. The most infamous instance of chemical weapons use occurred during the Anfal campaign, a systematic campaign of genocide and ethnic cleansing targeting Kurdish civilians in northern Iraq. In 1988, Iraqi forces launched a series of chemical attacks on Kurdish towns and villages, including the infamous gas attack on the town of Halabja, which killed an estimated 5,000 people and injured thousands more. These chemical attacks constituted clear violations of international law and fundamental human rights principles, leading to widespread condemnation and calls for accountability. Despite overwhelming evidence of the regime's culpability, Saddam Hussein and his government denied responsibility and sought to deflect blame onto external actors. Another most controversial and consequential action of Saddam Hussein's regime was the invasion of Kuwait in August 1990. The invasion, motivated by territorial disputes and economic grievances, triggered international condemnation and military intervention, leading to the Gulf War of 1990-1991. Hussein's decision to invade Kuwait was met with swift and decisive action by the international community, which mobilized a coalition of countries led by the United States to reverse the Iraqi aggression. The subsequent military campaign, known as Operation Desert Storm, resulted in the liberation of Kuwait and the expulsion of Iraqi forces from the country. The Gulf War had far-reaching consequences for Iraq and the region, including the imposition of economic sanctions, the destruction of infrastructure, and the loss of countless lives. The war also exposed the vulnerabilities of Hussein's regime and laid the groundwork for future conflicts and instability in Iraq. But again, there are ways to view everything, and we leave the decision up to you. If you have reasons for anything that you have come across, let us know in the comments section. Lastly, let's talk about how he was assassinated, so you get the last piece of the puzzle. Following a failed attempt to appeal to the United Nations for a mandate to invade Iraq, the United States, along with forces from Australia, Denmark, Netherlands, Poland, and Great Britain, launched Operation Iraqi Freedom on March 19, 2003. On December 13, 2003, Hussein was found hiding in a small underground bunker near his hometown of Tikrit, Iraq. He had been on the run for several months, with his whereabouts remaining a mystery to coalition forces and Iraqi authorities. Acting on a tip from an informant, U.S. soldiers raided the location and apprehended Hussein without resistance. Following his capture, Saddam Hussein was taken into custody by coalition forces and held at various detention facilities in Iraq. He was eventually transferred to Iraqi custody to stand trial for crimes against humanity, including the massacre of Kurdish civilians in the 1980s and the suppression of Shia uprisings in the aftermath of the Gulf War. On November 5, 2006, Saddam Hussein was found guilty by an Iraqi court of crimes against humanity and sentenced to death by hanging. Despite international calls for clemency and concerns about the fairness of the trial, Hussein's execution was carried out on December 30, 2006, at a facility in northern Baghdad. The execution was highly controversial and drew widespread attention from around the world. The circumstances surrounding Saddam Hussein's capture and execution remained subject to debate and speculation, with questions raised about the legitimacy of the trial process and the motives behind his prosecution. Nonetheless, his death marked the definitive end of his regime and the beginning of a new chapter in Iraq's turbulent history. And why was the U.S. involved in all this? The United States' involvement in the capture, trial, and execution of Saddam Hussein can be traced back to its decision to lead a coalition invasion of Iraq in 2003. The primary justification given by the U.S. government for invading Iraq was the belief that Saddam Hussein's regime possessed weapons of mass destruction, including chemical and biological weapons, and was actively pursuing nuclear weapons capabilities. This belief was based on intelligence assessments that later proved to be flawed. In the aftermath of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, the U.S. government adopted a proactive approach to combating terrorism and perceived state sponsors of terrorism. Iraq, under Saddam Hussein's rule, was viewed as a potential threat to U.S. national security interests and a destabilizing force in the Middle East. The Bush administration advocated for regime change in Iraq, arguing that Saddam Hussein's authoritarian regime posed a threat to regional stability and the promotion of democracy and human rights in the Middle East. The invasion was framed as a means to remove Hussein from power and establish a democratic government in Iraq. Iraq's strategic location in the Middle East, its vast oil reserves, and its potential as a staging ground for military operations in the region were also factors driving U.S. interest in Iraq. The U.S. sought to exert influence in the region and maintain its position as a dominant global power. Given these factors, the United States took a leading role in planning and executing the invasion of Iraq in March 2003. After Saddam Hussein was captured by coalition forces in December 2003, the U.S. played a significant role in supporting the establishment of the Iraqi Special Tribunal and providing technical and logistical assistance for Hussein's trial. Now we leave this up to you to decide if he was a villain or is shown as a villain to make people think the U.S. did the right thing. How do you see him? Let us know in the comments section. Was he a villain or a hero? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: African politics, economy, and increasing power. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.